Hello and welcome to Firstpost America, your home for the biggest stories shaping the US and the world. I'm Cary Johnston, live from the Firstpost studios. Our top story on the show today. As Russia, the US and Ukraine prepare to talk peace, will Putin and Zelensky choose to end the war? Also on the show, as the world loses its last remaining nuclear arms treaty, is a new global arms race looming large? Donald Trump hosts his Colombian counterpart, Gustavo Petro, in the White House, ending weeks of bitter feuding between the two leaders. And are the Punjabi Devils just motorcycle rebels, or a dangerous network dealing guns and explosives in California? We begin with the latest on the war in Ukraine. American, Ukrainian and Russian representatives have gathered in the UAE today for a fresh round of trilateral talks aimed at ending the war. The meetings in Abu Dhabi are expected to continue throughout Thursday and mark the second round of this three-way format, following initial talks held at the same venue last month. But just before the talks were scheduled, Russia hit Ukraine with 450 drones and more than 70 missiles, according to Ukraine's Air Force. Ukrainian authorities say the overnight strikes were aimed primarily at the country's energy system. It damaged thermal power plants and left thousands of people without electricity in the middle of winter. Emergency power outages were reported in parts of Kyiv. Other facilities were also damaged in Dnipro, Vinnytsia and the Odessa region. Meanwhile, in Zaporizhia, two 18-year-olds were killed and at least 8 others wounded. In Kharkiv, a strike on a densely populated neighborhood set an apartment building on fire, injuring several residents. In response, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called for stronger international pressure on Russia. He said the strikes were a deliberate attempt to terrorize civilians.
We expect a response from the United States on the Russian strikes. It was America's proposal to stop strikes on energy infrastructure during diplomatic efforts and the cold winter period. This request was made personally by the President of the United States. We see that Russia responded to this request with a record use of ballistic weapons. Not even 4 days have passed from the week that Russia was asked to observe. This also says a lot about everything else Russia promises or may promise. If their word is not kept now, what can be expected later?
Russia has also accused Ukraine of carrying out deadly shelling in a Moscow-occupied town in southern Ukraine. Kremlin-installed authorities said Ukrainian artillery fire hit the town early on Tuesday, killing 3 people and damaging civilian buildings. The White House said President Donald Trump was not unaware of the attack.
But today we've seen that Russia has launched some of the heaviest attacks this month. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I spoke with the president about it this morning, and his reaction was unfortunately unsurprised.
The latest attack comes after Trump on Monday repeated his disputed claim that he had stopped 8 wars, adding that his administration may soon have positive news on efforts to end the war in Ukraine.
We settled 8 wars, and I think we're doing very well with Ukraine and Russia. For the first time, I'm saying that. I think we're going to maybe have some good news. We're losing 25,000 people a month are being killed in that war, ridiculous war. 25,000. It was 31,000 last month. Think of it. Young, beautiful kids, the kids of parents, their parents.
Well, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said the strikes underscored Russia's lack of seriousness about peace. He also paid tribute to Ukraine's fallen soldiers in Kyiv, even as air raid sirens sounded across the capital.
But I'm absolutely sure that the Americans will have noticed. They see what happened, they will hear this, they will take this also what it is. And that is an attack, again, on innocent civilians, on civilian infrastructure, which I think is unacceptable. And this has nothing to do with winning a war or fighting a war, which, as I said, in itself was unprovoked, starting on the 24th of February 2022. But this is creating chaos.
The barrage also prompted NATO allies, including Poland, to scramble fighter jets and place air defense systems on alert, though no airspace violations were reported. So as Ukraine endures its fourth winter of war, negotiators head to the table again this week in the hope of reaching an agreement to end the conflict. More talks amid more strikes, and for now, still no peace. Well, for more on this, we have with us Arkady Moshes, Director of the Russia and Eurasia Programme at the Finnish Institute of International Affairs, joining us live from Helsinki. Welcome to the programme. Realistically then, what hope is there of any kind of lasting peace being achieved with these talks? What are the sticking points?
We're very far from even the moment when we could potentially foresee that some progress will be reached. I mean, we cannot see what kind of trade-offs, what kind of exchanges, what kind of concessions could be made by both sides. Ukraine needs security guarantees. We see that these security guarantees are not really coming. I mean, they're discussed, but it's very difficult to say what they could be. It's very difficult to say what kind of security guarantees to Ukraine Moscow could agree, and so on and so forth. But Moscow continues basically pushing forward the demands which have been there on the table or from the very beginning, from the very start of the war 4 years ago. It's the territories, it's weakening of Ukrainian military, it's no NATO presence on the Ukrainian territory, and so on and so forth. It's really difficult to say, despite everything that we hear from the White House, I mean, that there is any progress can be within reach.
How desperate, though, is President Trump, you mentioned the White House there, to achieve a win here? After all, he had famously claimed he could solve the conflict in 24 hours.
Unfortunately, I don't think he's desperate. We've learned throughout this 1 year that he has been in power that he may speak he may be upbeat, he may promise, he may hope. But then when nothing happens and there is no progress, I mean, he may turn towards another issue and start the whole game all over again, talking about something else. I mean, his diplomacy has not been successful, unfortunately. But on the other hand, this has not had any impact on the way he speaks about the things. He probably now sees more problems. But he's still fairly, his approach is often inconsistent, because one day he can say that Ukrainian position is the major obstacle. The other day he will say that the Russian position is the major obstacle. He's probably trying, and we hear about, for example, a new package of sanctions being prepared, which can be applied and imposed on Russia in case there's no progress. But yes, unfortunately, the American line, the American course is also difficult to understand. That's one of the problems in this whole business.
And where does NATO now stand in all of this, especially with Europe unsure of the Trump administration's support over Ukraine?
I think NATO, I mean, how I see what the Europeans are doing, Europeans are trying to strengthen their own diplomatic negotiating position. They're trying to see what they can do without the Americans. And I mean, honestly speaking, in the last 4 years, the change in the European approach has been quite remarkable. Let's remember that in the beginning of this war, they were basically talking, I don't know, about blankets and maybe helmets. That was it. And already within the first couple of years of the war, the approach changed completely. Europeans started not only rendering a lot of financial and economic assistance to Ukraine, but also started delivering the weapons. They agreed that the money, a lot of money can be, that they're going to use to buy weapons in the United States, but also to pay for the weapons produced in Europe. European position is changing and it's strengthening. I'm not yet. This is not to say that NATO doesn't matter. NATO does matter, but I think the Europeans are trying to realize that even if there is no NATO around, they should be able to help Ukraine to quite an extent, actually. And this is progress, and this is the change of the position that will work for Ukraine and that will work for the Europeans.
Arkady Moshes, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Firstpost America. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting.
The world is about to lose the last remaining nuclear arms control treaty between the United States and Russia. The Kremlin is already describing it as a dangerous phase. Even former US President Barack Obama has reacted, issuing a warning of a global arms race. The treaty, which expires tomorrow, is called New START, also known as the Prague Treaty. It was signed in 2010 by the then US President Obama and Russia's then President Dmitry Medvedev. Well, at the time, it was sold as a simple idea with enormous consequences. If the two biggest nuclear powers on Earth could limit their weapons, the world could be safer and calmer. And for over a decade, that's exactly what it did. New START placed hard caps on the most terrifying category of weapons ever built: strategic nuclear weapons. Weapons not designed for battlefield victories, but for obliterating entire cities, governments, and industrial regions in a single strike. Well, under the treaty, both sides were limited to 1,550 deployed nuclear warheads. It placed strict limits on missiles, bombers, and launchers. But the real strength of New START wasn't just the numbers, it was the transparency. Twice a year, both sides exchanged detailed data. Almost daily, they sent notifications about movements of strategic nuclear forces. And most importantly, inspectors could show up at short notice to verify what was real and what was a bluff. But now, there are no negotiations to extend it. Last year, Russian President Vladimir Putin proposed extending the agreement by another year. Back then, Donald Trump said it sounded like a good idea, but there has since been no update.
When President Trump was asked if he would honor the limits set in the START treaty as Russia did, he said, no, the treaty is expiring, let it expire. Americans indeed send signals that we need to start new talks on strategic stability. China is mentioned as well. But this is all done in public while talking to media, while experts from both countries have not had any concrete contacts.
Каких-либо конкретных контактов на эту тему между специалистами двух стран не происходит.
Well, now Donald Trump has brushed it off with chilling simplicity. He said, if it expires, it expires. That sentence is terrifying. It means the world enters an era where Russia and the US can build more weapons without explanation, without inspections, and without accountability. They can upload more warheads onto existing missiles within months. Experts say Russia could increase deployed warheads by around 60%, while the US could raise theirs by at least 110%. It means their nuclear arsenals could effectively nearly double, and the world might not even know the true numbers until it's too late. And remember, these are not small stockpiles. Together, Russia and the US control 87% of the world's nuclear weapons. The US already has around 3,700 nuclear warheads. Russia has more than 4,000. These arsenals dwarf every other nuclear power on the planet. And with the treaty expiring, it means nuclear disarmament and even more modest arms control is now gone. So when Obama warns that this could trigger a global arms race, he's not exaggerating. Because once Washington and Moscow stop limiting themselves, every other nuclear state starts asking the same question. If they're expanding, why shouldn't we? This isn't happening in a peaceful world either. It's happening with Ukraine burning, West Asia unstable, and nuclear threats being thrown around like political slogans. Putin has already used nuclear-capable missiles in Ukraine and repeatedly hinted at escalation. Trump has shown open contempt for treaties and international rules. So tomorrow isn't just a date on the calendar. It's the moment the world steps into a room with the lights off. And once they do, the only thing left between humanity and catastrophe is fear. Well, still to come on the program, renewed scrutiny over sex offender Jeffrey Epstein's links brings Bill Gates back into focus, but Melinda French Gates sets a clear boundary. But first, let's turn our attention to the White House. After months of bitter rhetoric and open threats, President Donald Trump and Colombian President Gustavo Petro appear to have dialed down their tension. The two leaders met at the White House yesterday and both struck a surprisingly positive tone. Just months ago, this relationship looked close to collapse. Trump had accused Petro of allowing cocaine to flood the United States. Petro had condemned the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro by US forces. Donald Trump even floated a similar operation against Petro. But on Tuesday, that confrontation gave way to caution and diplomacy.
The impression I have from a recent meeting just a few hours ago is positive. First and foremost, that is the reality. Even in my first phrase when I met President Trump for the first time in my life, because I did not know him, looking at the photos of the presidents of the United States, Lincoln was there in the picture. Freedom. We can be very different civilizationally speaking, historically speaking, but what unites us is freedom. And that is where the conversation began. You can make a pact for freedom. You can make a pact for life. Life and freedom go together today. And that is what we can come together on. That was the conversation.
President Trump also struck a warmer note.
He and I weren't exactly the best of friends, but I wasn't insulted because I never met him. I didn't know him at all. And we got along very well, and we're working on that. We're working on some other things too, including sanctions. And yeah, we had a very good meeting. I thought he was terrific. He was very good. We got along great.
Notably, there was none of the usual interaction with journalists, avoiding the kind of televised Oval Office showdown many in Bogota had feared. Or instead, the mute footage released only revealed a warm handshake in the West Wing, followed by a meeting between the American and Colombian leaders in the Oval Office. US Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio were also present. Trump even signed a copy of his book, The Art of the Deal, for Petro, writing simply, "You are great." Petro returned the compliment, praising Trump's directness, while also acknowledging their deep political differences.
I think a path is born without falling into vanity, because arrogance is a bad companion, and greed, even worse, greed kills life. But here a path is born, or it is strengthened, because in reality it has never disappeared. It is a path where different people, different regimes, different ways of thinking, different powers, because we have power too, just a different kind, can meet. There is no need to box. We do not hit each other. We do not ruin each other. We smile at each other. I like you, he told me.
President Trump said both sides are now working on anti-drug trafficking cooperation, as well as possible steps towards lifting US sanctions on Colombia. The bilateral talks also touched on regional flashpoints. Petro said Trump agreed to mediate Colombia's trade dispute with Ecuador and security along the Colombia-Venezuela border. The fight against illicit drugs remains the core issue, though. Washington describes Colombia as the world's largest cocaine producer. The Trump administration has touted the idea of using force to tackle the threat. Meanwhile, Petro points out that the US is the largest cocaine consumer and is pushing a different approach. He wants the drug war to prioritize peace with minimal reliance on military force and airstrikes. He has long criticized US-backed operations that have killed dozens in the Caribbean and Pacific. Yet in the days leading up to the meeting, Petro offered clear gestures of goodwill. Colombia agreed to resume accepting US deportation flights, reversing a decision that had triggered last year's falling out. So for now, both leaders are talking cooperation, not confrontation. Trump wants results on drugs. Petro wants sanctions relief and a reset with Washington. The big question now is whether this is a true reset or simply a truce until the next test of power, policy and personality. Now, a California-based motorcycle club is at the center of a major US federal crime case. A 27-year-old Indian origin man who founded a motorcycle club called the Punjabi Devils has pleaded guilty in a US court to serious weapons charges. Investigators say the group had links to an international biker gang and was involved in illegal arms dealing. US agencies say it's part of a larger crackdown on organized crime networks. More details now in our report.
It began as a biker story in California. It has ended as a major federal crime case. Jashanpreet Singh, a 27-year-old Indian origin man, is the founder of the Punjabi Devils motorcycle club. He has now pleaded guilty in a U.S. federal court to serious charges linked to illegal arms trafficking and possession of a machine gun. U.S. prosecutors say Singh lived in Lodi, California, and operated his biker group from Stockton. On the surface, it appeared to be just another motorcycle club, but investigators say it functioned like an outlawed gang involved in criminal activity. The Punjabi Devils were linked to the Hells Angels, one of the most infamous biker gangs in the world, known for its history of violence and organized crime across several countries. However, Singh just came under law enforcement radar in June 2025. That is when he attempted to sell a cache of illegal weapons to an undercover police officer. The deal included a short-barreled rifle, 3 assault-style rifles, 3 devices capable of converting those rifles into machine guns, and a revolver. After the attempted sale, police carried out a search of Singh's residence, and what they discovered raised serious alarm within the agencies involved. Officers found a fully automatic machine gun, more conversion devices, a silencer, and high-capacity drum magazines. They also recovered explosive material, including a pineapple-style hand grenade and a device believed to resemble a military claymore mine. Bomb disposal teams were called in immediately. The explosives were destroyed on site to prevent any danger to the public. Singh was first charged under state law in San Joaquin County. However, in July 2025, he failed to appear in court, triggering a bench warrant for his arrest. Then just 2 days later, the Federal Bureau of Investigation received an alert from U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Singh had booked a one-way ticket to India and was scheduled to depart from San Francisco International Airport on July 26. Federal agents tracked him down at the airport and arrested him before he could board the flight. Authorities say the arrest stopped a clear attempt to flee the country. Since then, Singh has remained in federal custody. He has now formally pleaded guilty to unlawfully dealing in firearms and possessing a machine gun. The investigation involved multiple agencies, including the FBI, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, Homeland Security Investigations, immigration officials, and local California police departments. Prosecutors say the case is part of Operation Take Back America, a nationwide campaign aimed at cracking down on organized crime groups, street gangs, and illegal weapons networks. Singh is scheduled to be sentenced on May 11, 2026. For arms trafficking, he faces up to 5 years in prison and a fine of $250,000. For possession of a machine gun, he could receive up to 10 years in prison and a fine of $250,000. The final sentence will be decided by the judge based on federal sentencing guidelines and the overall seriousness of the case. But for U.S. authorities, Singh's guilty plea marks a major breakthrough. They warn this is only one case in a much larger fight against underground gangs operating in plain sight, and the real scale of the problem may still be unfolding.
On to our final story now today, the continuing revelations over Jeffrey Epstein, the U.S. financier and sex offender who died in jail in 2019. When files pertaining to his investigation resurface, the media asks who's guilty, instead perhaps of asking who has been carrying the weight of these choices for years. Because there's the moment when a scandal is exposed, and then there's all the time someone has spent living with it. The Epstein episode is doing exactly that, and among the various powerful names mentioned in the files is Bill Gates. He's the co-founder of Microsoft and one of the world's richest people. He's long acknowledged that meeting Epstein was a mistake.
I never went to the island, I never met any women, and so, the more that comes out, the more clear it'll be that although the time was a mistake, it had nothing to do with that kind of behavior.
He has denied any wrongdoing, and legally speaking, his name in the documents does not mean guilt. But here's where the story shifts. Bill Gates' name is mentioned in recently released files related to the Epstein investigation. Melinda Gates, his former wife, was asked about this in a podcast, and her response came not as a philanthropist, not as a co-chair of their foundation, but as a woman reflecting on a marriage that lasted nearly 3 decades. She spoke of sadness and of painful memories.
For me, it's personally hard whenever those details come up, right? Because it brings back memories of some very, very painful times in my marriage. Whatever questions remain there of what I can't even begin to know all of it. Those questions are for those people and for even my ex-husband. They need to answer to those things, not me.
She said all those questions are for him to answer. Well, to understand why, we need to go back to 2021 when the two announced their divorce. The separation came after 27 years. Back then, there wasn't any public shame or drama. It ended with dignity. But over the years, the complications came to light. Melinda Gates had raised concerns years before the divorce. Concerns about Bill Gates' ties with Epstein. Reports also point to controversies around his alleged infidelity concerning an alleged workplace affair. But Bill Gates' association with Epstein was a major factor, and that led to the breaking point. Now, fast forward to the present. Bill Gates is again in the Epstein spotlight. There's a claim that he caught a sexually transmitted disease. They come from unverified draft emails written by Epstein. He and his team have categorically rejected the allegations, but Gates admits there have been mistakes.
No, apparently Jeffrey wrote an email to himself. That email was never sent. The email is, false. So I don't know what his thinking was there. It just reminds me, every minute I spent with him, I regret and I, apologize that I did that.
Well, being named in the documents doesn't prove anything. Neither does it establish wrongdoing. But it does expose how the proximity to predators was normalized. And this has existed for years. Jeffrey Epstein was registered as a sex offender in 2008. He pleaded guilty to soliciting a minor. High-profile people from business, politics and academia still met and engaged with him even after that. It includes the brother of King Charles, ex-Prince Andrew, Ehud Barak, the former Prime Minister of Israel, and intellectual Noam Chomsky. So people knew who Jeffrey Epstein was, and yet the meetings, the emails and conversations continued. Well, this is why Melinda Gates' remarks perhaps land differently. Her response doesn't speculate, it doesn't accuse, it draws a clear boundary which perhaps shifts the moral spotlight. That's it on the show today. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye. The world doesn't fit in boxes, so why should your news? From battlefields to negotiation tables, from internet outrage to real-world injustice. The conversations everyone is having and the ones they're avoiding. It's the same show, but this new year, Firstpost America gets a new look. I'm Cary Johnston, and this is Firstpost America.